Welcome back, everyone, to Mystery Case X. Today, we continue our series on real cases from around the world. The case I want to tell you about today is one that shook the entire nation of Japan back in 1997. I believe that after you hear all the disturbing details of this story, a cold and lingering unease along with some deeper questions will stay with you long after it ends. Without making you wait any longer, let us begin the story of the 1997 case that stunned all of Japan. The victim in this case was a young boy named Jun Hase, a student at an elementary school in the city of Kobe. He was only 11 years old and was enrolled in a special education class for children with mental or physical disabilities. Sadly, Jun Hase had an intellectual disability. May 27, 1997 was a morning that no student or teacher at that school would ever forget. When they arrived that day, they were met with a scene of absolute horror. A severed human head soaked in blood, placed deliberately in front of the school gate. It was the head of 11-year-old Jun Hase. And it got worse. Inside the boy's mouth, investigators found a folded piece of paper. On it, written in red ink, was a message in Japanese that read, "This is only the beginning of the game. Try and stop me if you can, you stupid police. I desperately want to see people die. There is an indescribable thrill in killing. A bloody verdict on you all is necessary to make up for my years of bitterness." Below the message, the killer had signed his name in both Japanese and English, Sakakibara Seito. The name Sakakibara was not chosen at random. It carried dark meaning, combining characters that represented wine demon and rose, roughly translating to something like demon of wine and roses. Looking at the crime scene and the taunting message, investigators immediately recognized a pattern. The killer appeared to be deliberately modeling himself after one of America's most infamous criminals, the Zodiac Killer, who had terrorized San Francisco in the 1960s. Like the Zodiac, this killer committed brutal murders and sent taunting letters to law enforcement as a kind of sick game. Then, on June 6, 1997, another letter arrived this time, sent directly to the Kobe Shimbun newspaper. It read, "Let the game begin. I must put my own life at risk because I will be hanged if I am caught. The police will be angrier and search harder for me, but I can only find peace through killing. Only by making others suffer can my own pain be eased." It was compulsory education that turned me into an invisible person. In that letter, the killer lashed out at Japan's education system, blaming the pressures it placed on him for turning him into what he had become. However, something went wrong at the newspaper. In what was likely a moment of panic or carelessness, the editor printed the killer's chosen name incorrectly. Instead of Sakakibara, the paper published Anibara, meaning demon rose. When the killer read it, he was furious. He immediately sent another message to the newspaper warning, "From now on, if you get my name wrong or ruin my mood, I will kill 3 people a week. And if you think I only target children, you are very much mistaken." After reading this, police drew 2 conclusions. First, this individual was clearly idolizing the American Zodiac Killer. Second, his emotional responses were deeply immature, reacting to a misspelled name with threats of mass murder, throwing a tantrum like a volatile child. The behavior pointed to someone psychologically unstable and dangerously impulsive. Police widened their investigation, narrowed their focus, and eventually brought in a suspect. What they discovered next sent shockwaves across the entire country. The suspect was only 14 years old. 14 years old. When taken into custody, he calmly admitted to killing 11-year-old Jun Hazy. And then he kept going. He also confessed to the murder of a 10-year-old girl named Ayaka Yamashita, who had been killed back in March of 1997. That brought the total to 2 murders, both committed before his 15th birthday. He confessed to both without any visible emotion. In describing the killing of the 10-year-old girl, he said he had struck her repeatedly in the head with a hammer until she stopped moving, and then continued striking her body afterward until he felt satisfied. In his diary, written after that killing, he had recorded today, "I carried out a sacred experiment to confirm just how fragile human beings really are. I brought the hammer down when she turned to face me. I think I struck her several times, but I was too excited to remember clearly." That entry alone reveals the depth of the disturbance inside this 14-year-old's mind. He framed murder as an experiment. He wrote about it with excitement rather than horror. But the most chilling details came when he described what he had done to Jun Hazy. He said he lured the intellectually disabled boy up to a hillside near the school. There he strangled him with a cord until he died, and then used a handsaw to remove his head. He left the body on the hillside, brought the head home, hid it in the bathroom, and spent time with it. This behavior is consistent with what psychologists identify as necrophilia, an obsessive and pathological fixation on human remains. He kept the head through the night and early the next morning carried it to the school gate and placed it there before anyone arrived. His stated goal was to force every student, parent, and staff member to confront that sight. He wanted to terrorize the entire community. Under Japanese law at the time, individuals under 16 years of age could not be prosecuted as adults. To protect his identity, the government and media referred to him only as Juvenile A or Boy A. He received no prison sentence whatsoever. In October of 1997, he was placed in a specialized juvenile rehabilitation facility west of Tokyo for psychological treatment. So why did this happen? What drove a 14-year-old to commit acts like these? Psychologists who studied his records, school history, and behavioral profile concluded that his personality showed strong characteristics of a condition known in Japan as hikikomori. This term describes individuals typically between the ages of 13 and 29 who withdraw entirely from social life, confining themselves to their rooms, cutting off contact with the outside world, and spending their days playing video games, watching television, reading comics, and sleeping. He spoke to virtually no one, rarely left his room, and had no social presence, even online. Prominent psychiatrist Saito Tamaki analyzed the condition this way. Hikikomori functions like an abnormal psychological state, triggered by the crushing weight of social expectations, family pressure, and academic demands. These pressures gradually lead the individual into depression, a sense of purposelessness, and eventually despair. A journalist writing for Shukan magazine observed that the most tragic element of the Sakakibara case was that this disaster was entirely preventable. Yet, both his family and the school system ignored every warning sign. Japanese children face intense academic pressure from the earliest years of school because a student's grades are understood to determine their entire future. Sakakibara's parents were no different, pushing him relentlessly to be the top student in his class, even after specialists had warned them that his psychological state was unstable. Before the killings, he had already displayed disturbing behavior, including the torture and killing of small animals such as cats and pigeons. A pattern of escalating violence had been building for some time. When police searched his bedroom, they also found large quantities of violent and sexually explicit comics, videos and images which added another layer to the public conversation about harmful media being accessible to minors in Japan. The case ignited a fierce national debate. Defense attorneys argued that the perpetrator was still a child and that exposing him publicly would destroy any chance he had of reintegrating into society. The families of the victims wept and demanded that his identity be made public. The government held firm on the law. However, the pressure generated by this case directly contributed to a significant legal change in 2000. The Japanese parliament revised the law and lowered the age of criminal responsibility from 16 to 14. Then came a development that shocked the public all over again. On March 11, 2004, the Ministry of Justice announced that Juvenile A had turned 21, had completed his rehabilitation, and was being released. Public reaction was immediate and fierce. A cold-blooded killer who had severed a child's head and taunted the police was now free to walk among ordinary people. Many people were outraged, demanding that now that he was of legal age, he should be imprisoned. Facing enormous public pressure, the government imposed strict monitoring conditions. However, that monitoring period ended on December 31st, 2004. Almost immediately after supervision ended, he moved twice in quick succession and disappeared from any official record. At that point, the general public had no idea what his real name was. Years passed. Then, in June of 2015, now 32 years old, he suddenly published a memoir titled Zeka, which roughly translates to absolute evil. In the book, written in his own words, he offered what many considered hollow expressions of remorse, followed by detailed and intimate descriptions of his thoughts and feelings during the murders he committed at age 14. When the book came out, the families of the victims were devastated. For them, it felt like a blade being twisted in an old wound, forcing them to relive the loss of their children all over again. Several major bookstores in Japan refused to carry it on ethical grounds. Despite that, the book quickly climbed to the top of the bestseller charts. The situation brought to mind a law in the United States known as the Son of Sam Law, named after serial killer David Berkowitz, who terrorized New York in the mid-1970s by targeting young women with long, dark hair. The fear he created was so severe that many women rushed to cut or dye their hair just to avoid becoming targets. After his arrest, Berkowitz realized he could profit from selling his story to publishers and filmmakers. The United States responded by enacting the Son of Sam Law, which prevents convicted criminals from financially profiting from accounts of their own crimes. Any money earned must be seized by the state and redirected to the victims and their families. Japan had no equivalent law at the time. The idea that a man who had butchered children was now freely writing a best-selling book and collecting royalties felt deeply and infuriating, unjust to the public. The name Sakakibara once again became a source of national rage. One publication decided it had heard enough. A magazine called Shukan Post broke the long-standing rule of anonymity and published the killer's real name, Shinichiro Azuma. They also printed his current occupation and address on the cover Sending a clear and deliberate message, Sakakibara may have escaped true legal punishment, but he would never be allowed to live in peace. From that moment on, the Japanese public finally knew the real face and real name of the person behind one of the country's most horrifying crimes. Looking back on this case, there are some very dark things to sit with. Regardless of how inexcusable and unforgivable the killer's actions were, the case also holds up a mirror to the intense pressures embedded in Japanese society. The expectation that every student must excel, rooted partly in a deep cultural tradition that equates failure with disgrace, creates a system that produces remarkable talent, but also places enormous psychological strain on generation after generation of young people. When that pressure builds past a breaking point, it can produce something deeply frightening. Not every person crushed by that weight turns violent, of course, but this case is a reminder of what can happen when warning signs are dismissed, when a struggling child is pushed harder instead of helped, and when no one stops to ask whether something is genuinely wrong. And that is where today's story ends. We will continue exploring other mysterious cases and the stories behind them in future videos. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, a like and a share go a long way in supporting the channel. Take care, everyone, and I will see you in the next one.